I mean, Joseph, that leads me to my question for you. What was the sort of turning point in your life when you went from living in a place of perhaps fear, perhaps sort of trauma-based unconscious living, to this more sort of higher self, working towards self-actualization and this more kind of conscious way of living that you're doing now and you're promoting and
Mm.
helping so many people?
Yes, it's a great question. I think for me, I mean, it's a good segue from our previous discussion about this concept of pleasure-seeking behavior and the fact it
Mm,
just wasn't satiating me. And I mean, the word escapism is coming to mind. A lot of I think modern Western people are practicing some form of escapism. If it's not porn, it's
mm,
drugs, it's alcohol, it's something else to kind of numb those neuroses that
mm.
you're just not dealing with in the moment.
Yeah.
And I had a very traumatic experience that I won't go into too detail because I've said it a couple of times and people probably know what it is. But essentially,
Mm,
I got to a point. I believe you get to a point in life. I believe there's a stage for men, maybe for women. I honestly don't know. Between the ages of kind of 20 and 25, where you
mm,
have some kind of crisis, some kind of point of uh, maybe something to do with your identity.
yeah.
I think Joseph Campbell kind of called this the hero's journey, part of the hero's journey.
Mm,
And for me, I believe what happens is either you find the courage and the strength to be able to deal with that particular dragon, let's call it, let's keep it the metaphorical dragon,
mm, mm,
or the dragon defeats you
mm,
in a metaphorical sense, and you kind of have to um, build your way back up
yeah.
to overcome that. It was the latter for me. Unfortunately, I didn't do very well in listening, and I wasn't sensitive towards the universe, God, cosmos, whatever you want to call it.
Mm,
And that ended up in a UK psych ward under a section 2, which is a 28-day hold on you because you're a danger to yourself or the public, right?
right.
So that was a real kind of emotional, physical, spiritual catharsis for me that I had to kind of go through.
Mm,
Sharing bread with paranoid schizophrenics and people with bipolar disorders. That was
mm,
my situation. So it was very, very traumatizing for me. And I just had to start building my way back up.
mm,
I opened up my idea to the notion of God after that,
mm,
because before that was the hardest atheist you'd have ever met in your life. It was very
yeah.
rational, scientific. If I can see it, if I can feel it, if I can touch it, I can smell it, then only then I know it exists, right? That was kind of my
Mm,
attitude, very
yeah.
empirical. um what a sad way to live, unfortunately. um and I started looking very objectively at my attachments. I started looking in the places that I did not want to look, which I think is a really good way to find where your next barrier is for growth, is look in the places you don't want to look, because it's going to
Yes.
be ugly and it's going to be disgusting. It's going to be dirty. The analogy I like to give is it's like you've been throwing your dirty clothes underneath your bed, for years and years, and you don't want to deal with that shit. There's going to be webs in there. There's going to be rats. It's going to be
Mm,
disgusting. I don't know what's down there,
mm,
but I had to do that. And one of the
yeah.
ones for me was addiction to sensation, addiction to pleasure, addiction to sex,
Mm,
addiction to porn, addiction to sensation, to lust, to desire, right? And that,
mm,
I believe, was my personal karma at that particular time in my life. And through a
mm,
painful ordeal of trial and error, I began to use meditation and sit in the seat of the observer of my
mm,
emotions, the witness of my emotions,
mm,
as opposed to identifying with them, which I believe is such an imperative, crucial tool for every single person on this earth to
mm,
develop. And my neurosis, my suffering, whatever it is that you are dealing with at the moment, diminished by 50, 60, 70%. It was
mm,
that substantial. Once you
mm.
begin to recognize that you're only the observer of your emotions, the observer of your thoughts, the witness of your thoughts, the witness of your emotions, life becomes so much easier to wake up and approach. And actually it becomes a pleasure,
100%, yeah.
um
Mm,
so that was the real transformative moment. And Unfortunately, I mean, I count myself lucky that I have that experience, that trauma. I think we
Mm.
mentioned in a previous interaction that, we got to actually be grateful for these things. It was the worst thing in my life that happened to me. Don't get me wrong, but in moments of meditation and reflection, I look back and I go, thank God, and I would
Powerful,
do it
brother.
all over again.
Well, you have to.
Um, yeah,
You have to. That's
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Yes, and I think you're right that we do come to these kind of crises points, and you can put it off. You can put it off. You can put it off,
But it will
and
find you. It
it
will
will
find
find
you
you.
eventually. That's
And
what
it.
happened to me.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I was trying to avoid it. That's the better way to describe that process, guys.
Mm,
Is it all? But and by the way, the metaphorical dragon, it will show up in the bad relationship you have with your father, or anything, and you can put it off. You can put it to the side. You can drink. You can do drugs, but it gets you eventually.
yeah.
um P- Peterson said, Jordan Peterson once said this thing that always like sticks with me. It wasn't probably the most profound thing he's ever said, but
Mm,
I've known it to be true in my life. Is I've never seen anyone get away with anything. I've
mm,
never seen anyone get away with anything. Like
mm,
you can get away with, I don't know, if you're, again, you have a bad relationship with your body, you're treating it with less gratitude than you should,
mm,
but that will come back in the reason you can't find love, or the reason why this keeps, like, there are patterns that show up. It's not as simple as, if you rob someone, someone will rob you later. Karma doesn't
no.
work like that.
Mm,
It finds its way in these other areas of your life. It's
mm,
very, very poetic, brutal, but poetic.
mm. Oh yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, I really like how you phrase that, and it's like, yeah, you cannot put it off. The sooner that you address the the areas which are currently dark, as soon as you shine the light of awareness into those areas and
Mm,
start dealing with the uncomfortable stuff, the better it's going to be for your life moving forward. And in
mm,
my case, I had the dragon come to my door.
mm,
So, and in a way, really, I think I remember specifically when I went from being a happy, open-minded kid to in a survive mindset, and that was the first day of secondary school. Now, I grew up in a village of 100 people, and my best mate's older brother, he was called Tommy. I thought he was the strongest, coolest guy there was. He knew all the WWE moves. He was super tall. He was the man. First day of secondary school, I see him get run down by three dudes.
wow.
They beat the hell out of him, and I was like, wow, okay, new paradigm.
Mm,
Anyway, basically, long story short, I was very dissatisfied with school and life in general. And then when I was 16, sorry, essentially I had my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. My grandmother and aunt both died, and one of my friends on my football team died as well. And then the subsequent years, about 2 years from there, my father's health gradually declined, and he eventually passed away. And I was living from a place of extreme darkness, of
mm.
anger. And I think this probably for many men out there, the only real acceptable form of emotion is anger. And do you notice how it's always the guys who are like, well, I'm not really emotional, but they'll flip at the littlest thing. That's emotion, brother. You're
Yeah.
emotional. You're very emotional. You're human. Learn from the wisdom of babies,
Mm,
right? Look how they, I'm not saying you have to go around crying all the time, but integrate your emotions, integrate
mm.
that shadow self into your conscious everyday persona, and that's going to be massively beneficial. So, yeah, you have to face the dragon at some point. Some people are really good at putting it off, and guess what? They call that a midlife crisis, because there gets a point where
Yeah.
you can only put it off for so long until it will tear down the walls, and it'd be like, right now, so. And
Mm,
you've kind of got two options really in this thing. You can, number one, create a new identity and kind of just keep going and following the same patterns. Or number two, you can sort of tear everything down and start from zero, which is, it sounds like what you did with meditation. And
yeah, yeah. I mean,
mm,
it's a real ego death. I think a term some people use to describe this process.
mm,
Many months after that, I mean, the theme of my thoughts was, I don't really know who I am, because you start.
mm,
There are many. Just to go back to, I suppose, the over identification maybe many people have with themselves, is that um you start to tell yourself stories that you don't really believe in anymore. And that's what was happening to
Yeah.
me. Even the way I dressed, I used to wear like a
Mm,
big fur coat. I used to wear like chains. I had like 2 earrings, studs in my nose.
mm,
I used to listen to like a lot of rap music and smoke weed, and that used to be how I was,
mm,
comfortable in presenting myself. And then after this kind of crisis
mm,
period, I had to throw the clothes away because it just felt like like ants on my skin. It just didn't sit with
mm.
who I was and how I was presenting myself to the world. Um, Very strange, very, very strange. And I started watching with more intensity the thoughts that
Mm,
were coming up, and um, the stories I was telling myself about me. And I would
mm.
realize I would start lying to myself. I would say things that I didn't believe in, and then the little voice in the back of my head goes, you don't believe that.
Hang on a minute. Yeah.
You don't even nearly believe that. You're just saying that
Mm,
because you're feeding into the idea of who you
mm,
are. And I started watching that voice in the back of my head a little bit more closely. And
mm,
that was part and parcel of the reason I started integrating the meditative practice into my life. And I was like,
mm.
well, there's this real fragmentation. There's this real like I thought I was going mad, like this kind of like schizophrenic feeling I was having with I
Mm.
have these thoughts and these ideas that I say about myself. I used to say things like um just weird stuff like I hate bowling. Like I hate bowling. And I like
Yeah.
oh people who bowl are homosexuals, like really weird stuff. And then I would just be, where did you get that idea from, really? And then it turned out that once when I was a kid, I was the worst at bowling at a
There you go.
party. And I was,
Mm,
and it's funny how you construct these ideas,
mm,
and you begin to tell yourself things that you don't even really believe in because of maybe a bad experience.
mm,
And then I started sitting again with that voice, and recognizing that, I'm not the stories I tell myself. I'm not my football team that I support. I'm not my gym group that I go to. I'm not the sports
mm,
team. I'm not the clothes I wear. I'm not the color
mm.
of my skin. I'm not even my name. I'm not even my name. I'm just a witness. I'm just consciousness. I'm just watching. I'm I'm renting Joseph for a little while in this particular incarnation, as I like to say,
Mm.
right?
It's
And
beautiful, man. Mm,
after I had, because again, I think, I don't want to portray that, kind of holier than thou, but you have these moments in meditation. Anyone that's practiced meditation for a prolonged period of time
mm.
has these kind of, I call them like glimpses behind the curtains, right? You
Yeah.
you get like a little peek sometimes, and you just realize, oh, it's all perfect. Oh, it's all perfect.